The boy who refused to quit. He was born into hardship, not into power, not into privilege, but into struggle. January 9th, 1913, Yorba Linda, California. A small house, a modest family, a boy named Richard Milhouse Nixon. The world around him was quiet, but inside that small home, life was never easy. His father, Francis Nixon, ran a tiny lemon farm that barely survived. His mother, Hannah, a devout Quaker, taught him faith, discipline, and endurance. They didn't have much. No luxuries, no comforts, just hope and hard work. From a young age, Richard watched his parents struggle. He saw his brothers fall ill. He buried 2 of them before he even became an adult. That grief, silent, raw, and constant, shaped the man he would become. It made him cautious. It made him ambitious. It made him hungry. At school, Nixon was quiet, not the kind of boy who drew attention, but behind that silence was a mind always thinking, always planning. He wasn't born charming like Kennedy or aristocratic like Roosevelt. He was ordinary. And he hated that word, so he worked harder than anyone else. He studied late into the night, debating, reading, and writing until exhaustion took him. His teachers said he had something rare, a fierce sense of purpose. At 16, he won a scholarship to Harvard, but his family couldn't afford to send him there. So he went to Whittier College, a small school near home. It broke his heart, but it didn't break his spirit. At Whittier, he joined debate teams, started clubs, and quickly became known for his discipline and intellect. Even then, he believed in one thing: if you couldn't be born into greatness, you could fight your way to it. After college, he entered Duke University Law School, graduating near the top of his class. He could have chosen comfort, but instead, he went back to California, back to the dust and the struggle that raised him. He opened a small law practice. He married Pat Ryan, the love of his life, a woman who, like him, came from humble roots. Their bond was built not on glamour, but on grit. Then came World War II. Nixon joined the U.S. Navy, serving as a supply officer in the Pacific. He wasn't on the front lines, but he earned respect for his honesty and organization. He saw corruption, inefficiency, and carelessness, and it fueled something deep inside him. He wanted to make America better, to make it work. When the war ended, he returned not as a soldier, but as a man with a mission. Politics was calling, and he answered. In 1946, Richard Nixon ran for Congress. He was young, tough, and relentless. He faced a well-known opponent, but Nixon's campaign was ruthless and focused. He called out corruption. He exposed hidden deals. He promised honesty, justice, and discipline. People listened, because behind his sharp words, they saw something real. A man who had clawed his way up from nothing. He won. And with that victory, the quiet boy from Yorba Linda stepped into the noise of Washington. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a journey that would take him to the highest seat of power in the world and drag him into its darkest depth. The climb before the fall. Washington, D.C., the city of power, pride, and politics. For Richard Nixon, it was a battlefield. He entered Congress with sharp focus and sharper ambition. He studied every rule, every rival, every weakness. He wasn't there to blend in. He was there to rise. In 1948, Nixon gained national attention during the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings. He went after Alger Hiss, a former government official accused of spying for the Soviets. It was controversial. It was bold, and it made Nixon famous. To some, he was a patriot, to others, a ruthless opportunist. Either way, the nation knew his name. In 1950, he ran for the U.S. Senate. His campaign was fierce. He exposed corruption, attacked opponents without hesitation, and built an image of a man who couldn't be bought or broken. He won again, and 2 years later, at only 39 years old, he was chosen as Dwight D. Eisenhower's running mate. The 1952 election was electric, but soon Nixon was accused of misusing campaign funds. The scandal nearly ended his career. The nation doubted him. The press turned hostile. Then came the Checkers speech. Sitting in front of a camera, with his wife Pat beside him, Nixon spoke directly to the American people. He admitted his mistakes. He explained every dollar, and he ended with a single emotional moment, telling America that the only gift he'd ever keep was a dog named Checkers given to his daughters. The country forgave him. He stayed on the ticket. Eisenhower and Nixon won by a landslide. As vice president, Nixon worked tirelessly. He traveled across continents, debated world leaders, and shaped U.S. foreign policy with cold precision. He wasn't charismatic, but he was intelligent, calculating, cautious, always one step ahead. In 1959, he faced Nikita Khrushchev in Moscow's kitchen debate. Two men, two ideologies, arguing face-to-face about freedom, power, and the future. It was tense. It was history, and Nixon held his ground. Then came 1960, his first shot at the presidency. His opponent, John F. Kennedy. Youth versus experience, charm versus control. The debates were broadcast on television, the first of their kind. Kennedy appeared calm, confident, glowing under the lights. Nixon, pale from illness and exhaustion, looked tense and uneasy. Those images changed everything. In living rooms across America, voters made their decision not by words, but by sight. Kennedy won. Nixon lost. Narrowly, painfully. For Nixon, it was humiliation. He'd climbed so high, only to be outshined by a man who seemed born for the camera. But Nixon didn't quit. He never did. He returned to California. In 1962, he ran for governor and lost again. The media mocked him. They called him finished. He stood before reporters and said, "You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore." Then he disappeared. For 6 long years, Richard Nixon lived in political exile. No spotlight, no campaigns, just silence. But behind that silence, a storm was forming. He studied, observed, waited. He watched America fall into chaos, Vietnam, protests, assassinations, distrust. And in that darkness, he saw his chance. A nation divided needed a man of control, a man who understood fear, order, and discipline. He believed he was that man. In 1968, he returned, older, calmer, harder. His message was simple: law and order. He promised to end the war, to restore peace, to bring back respect for America's government. The people, tired, scared, and broken, listened. In November 1968, Richard Nixon was elected 37th president of the United States. He had finally reached the top. The boy who came from nothing, the man who had lost everything, was now the most powerful person on earth. But power doesn't heal the past. And for Nixon, it would soon destroy everything he had fought for.
The rise of power and the fall of a president. January 20th, 1969. Washington stood still. Snowflakes fell over the Capitol step, and Richard Milhous Nixon placed his hand on the Bible, swearing an oath he had chased his entire life. At last, the boy from Yorba Linda was president. His voice echoed through the cold air. The greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker. But peace was a promise easier made than kept. The Vietnam War raged on. Protests filled the streets. The country he had promised to unite was tearing itself apart. Nixon believed in strategy, not sympathy. He created a plan called Vietnamization, to end the war not by surrender, but by shifting the burden to South Vietnam. Slowly, American troops began to come home, and for the first time in years, it seemed the nightmare might end. Behind the scenes, Nixon was building something else, a foreign policy machine that shocked the world. In 1972, he did the unthinkable. He opened the doors to China. For 25 years, no American president had ever spoken to Beijing, but Nixon walked through the forbidden gate. He met Mao Zedong, shook hands with Zhou Enlai, and forever changed the global balance of power. Even his critics were forced to admit this was genius. That same year, he met Leonid Brezhnev in Moscow. The two superpowers signed the SALT Agreement, limiting nuclear weapons for the first time. Peace, power, diplomacy. Nixon was winning everywhere. And then came 1972's election. He crushed his opponent, winning 49 out of 50 states. It was the most decisive victory in American history. Richard Nixon was untouchable, or so he thought. Then came a small break-in, a few men, a hotel named Watergate. At first, it seemed meaningless, just another political story. But piece by piece, the truth began to surface. Wiretaps, cover-ups, secret funds, and at the center of it all, the president's men. The press dug deeper. The FBI followed the trail, and the White House began to shake. Nixon denied everything. He called it a witch hunt. He fired investigators. He silenced aides. He believed power could protect him. But this time, power became his cage. In 1973, the Watergate hearings began. Televised, public, brutal. The world watched as Nixon's secrets unraveled. Then came the tapes, the recordings he had made in the Oval Office. Hours of his own voice, proving what he had tried to deny. The evidence was undeniable. Even his allies turned away. Impeachment loomed. August 8, 1974. Richard Nixon addressed the nation one last time. His face was pale, his voice heavy with defeat. He said, "I have never been a quitter, but as president, I must put the interests of America first." The next day, he became the first president in U.S. history to resign from office. As the helicopter lifted from the White House lawn, Nixon raised his hands, the famous V sign, a gesture of victory from a man who had lost everything. He flew away into silence, a fallen giant haunted by his own creation. In the years that followed, Nixon lived quietly in California. No cameras, no campaigns, only memories. He wrote books. He advised leaders. He tried to rebuild a legacy that history had already judged. He once said, "Others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them and then you destroy yourself." Perhaps he finally understood. April 22, 1994. Richard Nixon died at age 81. A man of brilliance, a man of flaws, a man who rose higher than most and fell harder than any. His story remains one of power and paradox, a reminder that even the strongest minds can be undone by the darkest corners of their own ambition.